Mazda has launched a rear-wheel drive, 6-cylinder diesel SUV, mad or brilliant. Diesels, they're falling like flies now. The Vauxhall Astra and Ford Focus no longer suck from the black pump, and even BMW has killed off much of its D-range. But Mazda likes to do things its own way, and it's continuing to do so with the Mazda CX-60. It seems that this diesel SUV has come about 20 years too late, but Mazda says it demonstrates a commitment to a multi-solution approach to sustainable mobility and the principle of the right solution at the right time. The idea is that the CX-60 also offers plug-in hybrid and petrol options, but that there is still a place in the range for a torquey, frugal power plant to satisfy high-mileage private buyers and people who need to tow. That makes sense in theory, but the reality is that diesels always used to be the darlings of the European fleet market, which has now switched more or less wholesale to plug-in hybrids and electric cars owing to incentives and rising diesel prices. The other problem is that, although the CX-60 PHEV impressed us on the launch, we subsequently ran one as a long-term test car and found it wasn't very efficient. The gearbox was clunky. It felt nowhere near as quick as the figures suggest, and the ride and general refinement were poor. Design and styling. For the past 10 years or so, Mazda has been pushing gently but steadily upmarket with its design and the quality of its interiors. It hasn't been shouting about it, because such claims, if spurious, inevitably get picked apart by anyone who has set foot in a BMW or Audi. It has just steadily been improving, which is arguably the right way to go about it. And now comes the next step, the right mechanical layout to push into the higher segments. Mazda has developed an all-new architecture for longitudinally mounted engines, giving native rear-wheel drive. Most versions of the CX-60 have four-wheel drive by way of a clutch-based system. The plug-in hybrid version uses a 193 bhp development of the 2.5-liter Skyactiv-G engine found in the Mazda CX-5, supplemented by a 173 bhp electric motor driving through an all-new 8-speed transmission. The latter is a conventional planetary gearbox, but instead of a torque converter, it uses a wet multi-plate clutch, a similar setup to what you will find in many Mercedes-AMGs. A 17.8 kilowatt-hours total capacity lithium-ion battery under the cabin floor supplies the current for the motors. For this review, we'll focus mainly on the mild hybrid 3.3-liter straight-six diesel CX-60, which comes as either an entry-level rear-wheel drive 197 bhp version or a 251 bhp four-wheel drive version. Both use the same gearbox as the PHEV, but with a smaller, 17 bhp, 113 pound-feet electric motor sandwiched between the flywheel and clutch pack. The 48 volts mild hybrid system can provide a slight boost under acceleration, smooth out the gear changes, and run the electrical system, while the diesel engine is shut down. The diesel engine itself is a new development. Mazda reckons a bigger right-sized engine doesn't need to work as hard as a downsized one, and can therefore run cooler and more efficiently, governed for longer periods by its innovative new combustion control software, than a smaller one. The net result, it says, is a 6-cylinder engine with better fuel economy than a 4, plus the benefits of a 6-spot, smoothness, and a more appealing sound. The innovations are twofold. The first are piston heads with roughly half-edge-shaped combustion chambers that use the available air more efficiently. The other is what Mazda calls distribution-controlled partially premixed compression ignition (DCPCI). The idea is that by partially premixing the air and fuel before they enter the cylinder, it can burn at a lower temperature without producing more soot or NOx. Interior. We had plenty of gripes with our plug-in hybrid long-termer, but the interior ambience was decidedly not one of them. Mazda wants to establish a uniquely Japanese brand of premium that is different in nature, but equal in quality to what you get from the German marques. That is most obvious in Takumi trim, with its light maple wood, fabrics, leather, and unusual stitching. In the entry-level exclusive line, some of the leather and fabric is replaced with slightly less special leatherette. However, you still wouldn't be disappointed stepping into it from a BMW X3. The CX-60 also maintains an array of physical buttons and switches, a usability delight. There's a general feeling of simplicity. That's mostly a positive, although the digital gauge cluster could have been made more useful with some extra configurability. The CX-60's cabin is far from the most practical, however. You might expect the tall and wide center console, when relieved of the battery pack it houses in the hybrid, to have plenty of deep storage bins, but there are just the two Q folders and a pretty shallow space under the armrest. The wireless charging tray isn't very deep, and the charger itself often malfunctioned during our testing. The rear legroom is similar to that in an Alfa Romeo Stelvio or Audi Q5, but slightly tighter than a BMW X3s. Some SUVs from the class below, which use transverse engines, have more space in the back. The Mazda is quite a way behind on boot space, with just 477 liters. The X3 and Q5 have 550 liters, while the Mercedes GLC has 620. Some of this deficit is explained when you lift up the floorboard. Underneath is actually quite a large space, but it is mostly filled by a bulky and awkwardly shaped piece of polystyrene-like material. It presumably has a noise-dampening function, but it's hard to believe it couldn't be shaped in a way that liberates more boot space. As with almost everything else, Mazda has a clear vision of what's right and what's wrong, and is sticking with it, prevailing wines be damned. For a long time it refused to offer a touchscreen at all, and while in its most recent models it has one, it only works with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, both available wirelessly, and then only while stationary. The latter is slightly frustrating, because smartphone mirroring doesn't work that brilliantly with the rotary controller, although you do get used to it. Otherwise, the system performs very well, with crisp but restrained graphics, a clear navigation system, not too many menus to navigate, and some shortcut buttons to help you do so. The standard stereo system sounds decent, and gives you options to tweak the sound. You can't have the Bose alternative in the exclusive line, but having tried it on another occasion, it's not a huge upgrade. Engines and performance. You might look at the 3.3-liter capacity of the Mazda's straight-six and wonder how it manages to make only slightly more power, 197 bhp, than the BMW X320D's 2.0-liter, 188 bhp. For comparison, that's a specific output of just 60 bhp per liter for the Mazda, versus 94 bhp per liter for the BMW. The thing is, that is deliberate, to a point. An under-stress six-cylinder will be nicer to drive and more economical than a harder working four. That's Mazda's theory, and it claims a thermal efficiency of 40%. To make matters worse on paper, our rear-wheel drive CX-60 was 57 kilograms heavier than the four-wheel drive X3. Both cars use very similar gear ratios, so it appears the slightly higher torque saves the day for the CX-60 because it proved a fair bit faster than the BMW in all metrics.